Hello everybody. I hope you're having a really enjoyable evening and have the good feelings of wrapping up another year of Larkin Street Board achievements and agency achievements and youth achievements. I have such fond memories of the party that you're at now, and I wish I could be with you, but Janet and I are still in Europe until September 1. What a wonderful opportunity to be able to honor the three wonderful women who are terming off, resigning the board at this juncture, and I asked if I could participate by videotape so that I could express a few thoughts about each of them, since I consider them to be really good friends and really important contributors to Larkin Street over the years. About 10 years ago, Mary Lester called me one day and said, I have a board candidate I'd like to suggest to you, a woman who's just moved here from Chicago, Mary Perhall. Would you meet with her? And I said, I'd be delighted. And of course, if Mary Lester asks, one responds, and with a great deal of confidence that it'll be a good suggestion. I did think, though, before meeting Mary Perhall, since she is newly arrived in San Francisco, how would it be that, probably without very many friends or contacts, she'd be able to contribute to our board. But when I met Mary, and I think it was at Il Fornaio restaurant in Levi Plaza, is that right, Mary? I was just wowed when I heard about Mary's work as a visionary and as a leader of Chicago Cares. When I learned that they involve thousands of volunteers in Chicago for community service and have done that for many years, and it was Mary and a friend who co-founded that and who co-led it for several years. At the time when I was talking with Mary and hearing about this, Larkin Street was quite a bit smaller than it is now. We weren't very well known in the community, even though it had been around for probably 18 or so years. We weren't able to raise very much in unrestricted funding because we didn't have a very big donor base or a very professional advancement and development office and leader. And we had very few contacts with the business community and had a tough time cracking into that to try to get support from it. So when Mary told me about Chicago Cares, I thought, wow, what a great potential addition to the board Mary could be. For she had so much creativity and so much experience which could potentially be ours. So through the process that you all know, Mary met people and the board development committee and the rest of the board and joined, we were happy to say, and Mary went on to come to this very evening. And in the early days that Mary was on the board, paving the way was just a concept which was being implemented for the first time. And Mary jumped in with her know-how and her high standards and her clear ideas of what constitutes a good event. And she very much influenced, as one of the leaders, the development of Paving the Way in the first year, and in putting on subsequent Paving the Ways for several years. Then, a little while after Paving the Way was developed, Mary came up with the idea that we now know as the CFO event. It was her creation, her big idea, and she was trying to think of something which could open up our relationships with the business community and the other nonprofit community that we didn't have contacts with, and also be able to develop a new fundraiser for Larkin Street's benefit for unrestricted funds. So Mary took the idea and worked on it, and she came to the executive committee and she got Vicki to be a team member of hers in thinking it through and figuring out how it could be real. And then she got Steve Kermsey as another ally who was used to be the board chair and who was a very able board member and who knew the finance committee and banking committee very well. And Mary kept working to refine, took the leadership, came to the executive committee, then the full board, to the new ED at the time, whose name was Sherilyn, and got approval eventually for launching the CFO event. And then over the years, starting with the first one, working with Steve Kermsey, and then with others, Mary was the leader of that, the inspiration, and we all know what a great contribution the CFO event has been in opening up Larkin Street to those communities, in getting a lot more volunteers, in raising a lot of money. You know the facts now better than I, but that's the way it got started. Thanks very much, principally to Mary and her brainchild. Also over the years, Mary and her husband Jack were always been very generous donors to Larkin Street, and for which all of us thank you very much, and thank you for these contributions. Mary, from my vantage point, I want to say that your dedication, your thoughtfulness, your imagination, your diligence, your tireless efforts, your high standards, your strong methods and approaches to convince others when you thought you had a really good idea, have in fact changed the life and the path of Larkin Street forever. And in this way, we all thank you, and I wish to thank you for having made such a huge contribution and been such a good friend and colleague for all of us. Welcome to the honorary committee, Mary. I first met Vicki about 10 or so 11 years ago when Phil Estes said he knew of Vicki as a very well-qualified, passionate, intelligent, knowledgeable, successful woman who he thought would really be a good addition to the board. So we had a board development committee meeting in which everybody was able to come, and we met at the cocktail lounge in the Mandarin, and that's where I remember seeing Vicki for the first time. And Vicki's passion and her intelligence and her strong desire to help homeless youth restart their lives touched all of us in a really important way, and we were all very, very glad for Phil's suggestion and that we had a chance to, over time, to offer her a position on the board. Vicki then went on during a very difficult time in Larkin Street's history in terms of its finances to take over the leadership of the Finance Committee. At the time, and it's important that people remember or hear about this history, we had not very good financial management, and with some very unusual approaches to financial management and control, which almost nobody else understood what was going on. We had pretty weak and shaky finances from one year to the other, and no real sense of stability or the prospect of it that we could figure out. And we were having a change in leadership, both for the organization as well as in the finance department. So Vicki is the chair of the finance department, the finance committee, working with some very able people on the board who were on that committee. Took a hold of things as board members, not as the doers or staff, and figured out what would make sense, what kind of controls we needed, what kind of planning we needed, what kind of people to be in that department at the top. And over time, with their skill and knowledge and commitment and tireless work, we're able to see that the Larkin Street finances were back on a solid footing, and that the prospects and the financial resources were much more promising as we went forward. I'd like to share a couple other remembrances about Vicki that are particularly important in my mind. One was, as I alluded to earlier, talking about Mary Purhall. Vicki was a very important team member of Mary Purhall in moving the concept of the CFO event forward so that it was well grounded in the realities of the Northern California finance world, which Vicki knew well because that's where her career has always been. And also in figuring out how to refine the concept so that it would meet the needs of the agency in the best possible way, and be able to take on the risk of would it be successful or not, or were we going to invest a lot of money and perhaps nobody would come and pay. And also in helping Mary articulate for the benefit of the executive committee and the board what the concept was and why it could take on a real life of its own and have a high probability of success. So that's the second specific remembrance I have of Vicki having made a very big contribution. The third that I'd like to tell you about, when I was the vice chair of the board and then the board chair, we had a very difficult couple years. We had a long-time ED left. We had a long search process for the next ED. We finally found the next ED. We had to, of course, bring her on board and help her get settled into the job. And she brought a finance director with her. And then we wanted to help introduce her to the community. And then we wanted to evaluate her performance. And lo and behold, after about a year, we decided that she wasn't the right person. So we had to make the decision as an executive committee that, in fact, we had enough insight to believe that for the medium and long term, she was not the right ED. We had to decide how to pass that news along and make a transition, and we had to think about who would be the next ED, and then to help that person, help the board select that person and confirm, and then also bring in a new finance person who could take over what were then very shaky finances, as I alluded to earlier. During this whole period of time, the executive committee had many meetings and phone calls to share information and ideas and to weigh our various courses of action and evaluate what was going on and think about who should be the new ED. We're talking about Sherilyn, by the way. And so during that whole time, Vicki was on the executive committee, and Vicki was always so clear thinking and always courageously came forward with what her ideas were and her points of view, and she backed the points of view that she thought were right, and she disagreed with them openly when she thought were incorrect, and she volunteered some new ideas. She always had the grace and charm and good nature and nice sense of humor that we know her to have. And she really, in that way, was an outstanding member of the executive committee and helped us all figure out what were the best courses of action. And I want to add just a PS. One of the complicating factors for all of us at the time was that the lawyers to Larkin Street said that we couldn't really tell any or many people what the truth was about our dissatisfaction with the last ED, because that might violate some regulations and laws and protocols, and therefore we had to do this in a way and figure out how to do things in a way that would be the right course of action for the agency, but at the same time, be acceptable to others, even though we couldn't tell the whole story. Vicki was very helpful in helping us figure that one out because of the complexity involved. Vicki, I'd like to say to you, and I'd say to Phil, who brought Vicki to everybody's attention, that indeed you have made huge contributions that I am aware of to this board and to the agency, and in turn to the kids who benefit from all the efforts being undertaken. You've set the bar high, and you've worked really hard, and you've had such good spirit and had such good grace and been such a good colleague that all of us are touched by you, inspired by you, and are very grateful to you. Thank you very much for what you've done. I met Anita when she was my student at Stanford. She was an MBA student, and she was also my research assistant in the 70s. And her now husband, George, was a faculty member at Stanford, so I knew him then too. As you know Anita now, you probably won't be surprised now to hear that in her MBA class at Stanford, Anita had more job offers from the investment banks and the consulting firms than any other classmate at Stanford in that year. When Anita and George returned to the Bay Area about 7 or 8 years ago, she and I took a long walk in the Presidio and talked about life that we both experienced and what each of us was looking forward to. And when she told me that she was on the board of a Boston not-for-profit that helped homeless kids, and that her day job was working in nonprofit finance, I thought, man, here is a perfect possibility for Larkin Street's board. And so Anita was introduced, and everybody was very happy to meet her, and she joined the board. And at this juncture, as Anita is now resigning because she and George are moving on, I'd like to just say that my experience of Anita on the Larkin Street board has been kind of like when Patty was on the board, and that is when Anita speaks, as when Patty spoke, everybody stops to listen. It's like that advertisement of Scudder or Stevens or whoever the investment firm. When they speak, everybody listens. Anita, as we all know, brings such enormous intelligence, such good, solid reasonings, such an articulate and clear mind, and so much relevant non-profit finance to Larkin Street and to the board, that all of us, from the very first moment that Anita joined the board, knew that when she decided to make a comment or to offer an opinion or to start a conversation or to introduce a new way of thinking about things, we needed to listen very carefully because she knew a lot and we were going to learn a lot. And indeed, Anita, both on the finance committee where you chaired it and on the executive committee where you, until now, I believe, are the vice chair, you've really helped with the decision-making processes and helping the board make some choices that otherwise we might not have known to consider and to make. And so in that respect, you really raised the bar, and for that we are all, starting with myself, eternally grateful. I look forward to catching up with you and George wherever you are next and taking a long walk and see what can be next. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great continuation of the evening. See you next year. Bye.